I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby here with Jimmy Goldblum, who is the director of A Broken House, which has been shortlisted for this year's Oscar for documentary short subject. And Jimmy, just give us a quick kind of, for those who have not yet seen this film, give us a quick little overview of the film.
Yeah, so it follows the Syrian architect and artist Mohammed Hafez, who came to the United States in 2002 to go to architecture school, and then he got stuck here. There was a Muslim ban at the time, which wasn't called a Muslim ban, and he was here on a single entry visa, and he got really homesick, and he started actually recreating models of his home city of Damascus as a way of sort of dealing with this homesickness. So it's sort of, the film explores those models, the art that he made, and how they sort of evolved through the many stages of the Syrian war and eventually the refugee crisis up until today.
I first want to talk about something that I just noticed immediately. I'm fascinated by the visuals in documentary filmmaking, and visually, this film has a very specific look. There's almost like this kind of, and correct me if I'm off here, but this kind of grainy, kind of almost like newsreel sort of texture to it. How did you come across? How did you come up with that way of shooting this?
Yeah, so Muhammad's models are incredibly tangible. They're incredibly physical. I mean, what he essentially does is he recreates buildings from his memory in Damascus, and then he destroys them as a way of sort of like encapsulating what happened during the war. So when you look at them, you're like, you'll see dust coming off them. You'll see like rebar that he recreates in miniature. And for me, I sort of made a decision early on that I wanted to shoot it in film. So I shot it on Super 16 because, and then some of that is just like sort of honoring the spirit of his work. I was like, I'll use a physical medium if he's using a physical medium, but also I think it does kind of create this sort of like ethereal, dreamy quality to the film, which I think really works well with the nostalgic themes.
I'm curious, how did you first become aware of Muhammad, and how did he become kind of the subject of this film?
Yeah, so actually, I was helping with a producer of mine on the short, Matt Weaver, to set up a series for Apple Plus called Home, which at the time was going to be Apple's first doc series. And so Home explores architects and the way that they thematically explore notions of home in their work, right? And so Muhammad actually came up as the research process for that series, and he's perfect, right? And also to like give you context, this was 2017 that we were having these conversations. The previous administration had just announced their Muslim ban. To have a voice like Muhammad on the air at that time would have been incredibly significant. So we were all very excited, but an executive at Apple, who no longer works there, rejected it actually because they didn't think Muhammad lived in a palatable enough home to feature on TV. And so I was very upset. And I was like, this story absolutely needs to find a way to be told. And by like a pure act of kismet, we met the former Congressman Dick Gephardt, who at that time was just apoplectic about the state of immigration in the country and willing to produce things that were humanizing in a very dehumanizing climate. So that's how we put it together.
I think those moments of him destroying these models that he's built, and you're right, the texture of them, they're almost tangible through the screen, and so there's an additional almost kind of heartbreak to see those beautiful structures be destroyed, which is obviously symbolic of what's happening in Syria. But in terms of staging those and putting that on film, what kind of conversations did you and Mohammed have about putting those moments on film?
It was just really important for me to spend some time with Muhammad without the cameras, of course, just to kind of get a sense of what his artistic process was. And I sort of, like when you see the model, it's like almost shocking to figure out how it could have been created. I didn't realize that he would actually make a building and then destroy it until I actually got there and was starting to film with him. And so for me, it was just about really trying to honor his artistic process really what he does is he goes into a fugue state. And like, he didn't destroy those models with any sort of intentionality at the time. I mean, there was a 2-year process where he was just making very nostalgic pieces of Damascus, like things that he loved. He eventually destroyed them because he was so pent up from watching the grotesque imagery of the Syrian war in Connecticut and not being able to do anything that was just something that erupted out of him. It was therapy that he didn't know was therapy. And so I just really wanted to sort of give him space and be there with him as he sort of therapeutically approached his art.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because that feeds right into what I was going to ask next, which is how did you go about developing, I would assume that a relationship like that, to be able to film something that personal, requires such a level of trust between filmmaker and subject. How did you go about fostering that?
I mean, yeah, and thank you for saying that. I mean, to me, like nothing's a given, right? Like as a documentary filmmaker, I don't ever feel entitled to someone's story. I don't ever feel entitled to someone's space or their time. It's something that has to be earned, And so the only way that I know how to do that is to be very transparent with what my intentions are and to have like open, transparent conversations with my participants and see where they are. And it's a dialectic. I mean, Muhammad's an artist, I'm an artist. Somewhere in between, there's the synthesis that becomes the film. And so I can just say what I want to do, create my commitments and adhere to them. And then after you do that enough, you build a rhythm, right? Where it's like, okay, like I get that this director is going to be like true to his word. And so like eventually you can have scenes like the one with his mother in the film, which was ultimately the last thing that we actually shot. And it's like, you can't do that. You can't do that at the beginning of a shoot. You can only do that really if you put in the time to make sure that your subject knows that you're there with their best intentions at heart.
Yeah, I was going to get to that scene between Muhammad and his mother, who has, stayed back in the Middle East and can't come to the United States. They have to meet in Damascus, I believe.
They actually have to meet in Beirut, which is an hour away on the
right.
highway, because Muhammad can't go back, because if he did, he would be drafted into the military.
So that scene, there's that poignant scene where he's having these conversations throughout the film with his mother about, trying to get the family together and tired of being separated, and she won't leave. But then there's really the climax of the film is that conversation between the two of them. I mean, how did that come about? Was that just a completely organic thing that you just happened to catch?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing with Muhammad and his mother is a long and complex tale. But she did come and live in Connecticut as a refugee for a couple of years, actually. But this is the thing where it's like so often the conversation in America is like, we're giving so much to these people and they're taking, and it's and the reality is that she had a very, prior to the Syrian war, very, very comfortable existence in Damascus. She lived very comfortably. All of her sisters live there. It's her culture. It's where her heart is. She feels rooted in this place, right? And so then to come into a context in New Haven, Connecticut, where she's, struggles with the language, people only see her as a certain way. She's sort of invisible in a lot of respects. So she made a very conscious choice to go back, to be in a war situation, because actually it felt safer to her in her heart. It's like, it's a very complicated thing to talk about. And then in terms of that conversation, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, so what you're referring to, for people who haven't seen it, is that Muhammad at a certain point is just pleading for his mother to return with him to Connecticut, where his father lives. They're not divorced, but they're, it's just sort of this unspoken thing. And then, his siblings are scattered to 4 other countries around the earth. He's like, we haven't been under the same roof for 15 years. Like, it's too much. Like, come back. And she just won't, because I think like to come back would be to acknowledge the brokenness. It would to actually be able to give it language, whereas to stay apart is to kind of live in this unspoken place. And to film something like that, some of it is just, I don't know if I necessarily believe in luck, like you kind of create your luck. I just think that I had done a lot of work to build intimacy with Muhammad, and he felt comfortable having conversations by the end of that shoot that he hadn't had in his whole life.
There's so many different lenses through which to view this film. It's a portrait of an artist. It's about, the refugee crisis. It's about families. As you're putting the film together, as you're editing and shaping it, what is your thought process? Do those things come out during editing, or do you go in with kind of a clear vision of what you want to be, what you want the film to be?
It's a really interesting question. In some ways, I've actually used the metaphor of sculpture to describe my editing process, which is that you have this like solid block of marble, which is your hours of footage, and then you just chip away at it. You pull things out, particularly with a short. With the short, it's really a process of removing things to get to something that actually feels resonant. And so that was what we were doing. We were just kind of chipping away until we got it what the essence was, until we sort of understood that this is what the film wanted to be. To me, it really sort of evolved into a story that was about the homesickness that refugees and immigrants experience. And I think in some ways, even though I was editing right prior to COVID, maybe there was a part of me that was anticipating something. I have no idea. But yeah, I mean, editing, I had an incredible editor, Brad Turner, who works between documentary and narrative. And, he and I were just there all the time, just trying things out, juxtaposing the imagery that, didn't make logical sense, but made emotional sense until you just get it something that makes you feel. And like, I would watch that movie for a really long time and it would connect very deeply with things inside me, things that I was going through with my own family and my wife at the time. My wife is a Muslim immigrant from Pakistan, like I was screaming at the world for her to be heard in this context. And so I was able to process some of that through the filmmaking. The edit was really cathartic for me.
Is there something about your career has been very varied in terms of the types of films that you've done and the types of projects that you take on. So what governs your choice of projects?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's like, this is the first sort of like independent documentary I've done since my feature. So my feature was Tomorrow We Disappear, which was about a magician's ghetto in India that was being bulldozed in order to make room for the city's first ever skyscraper. And then after that, I kind of like went into the woods of like, I was very lucky. Like I started directing on Chef's Table and like other sort of doc series. But in a lot of respects, A Broken House was like a return to me. It was like, Tomorrow We Disappear was really about cultural loss. It was really a collaboration with, magicians, acrobats, and puppeteers, and sort of telling their history and their story, using their art impressionistically. And so like it laid all the thematic groundwork that I was able to go more deeply with A Broken House. And so I don't know. I mean, for me, this was very much like I was so angry I was so angry at what was happening in the country. I was so angry at what was happening. Every time I'd go to an airport, there'd be a line for me and a line for my wife. I was just like furious all the time. And so this film was really like a way to process my anger, and to turn it in, because underneath anger almost always is sadness, almost always. And so like, I think for me, like I was able to get to something that felt a little bit more beautiful in the process of making this.
So has this kind of, return to this sort of filmmaking, this kind of independent style of filmmaking, has it lit a fuse in you in terms of what you want to do next?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like it's been like, like ostensibly, looking at my portfolio of work, you'd be like A Broken House is maybe like a smaller thing than I've done, like I've set up some Netflix shows, I've set up an Apple show, right? But like, to me, it's so much more aligned with my heart. It like every day that I've worked on this project has felt like a blessing to me, because I feel so aligned with what Muhammad is saying and the message that he's putting out there in the world. And to like be someone who can help channel that and extend it is like a privilege, So like, I just have so much more energy working on this small short documentary than I do working on like big budget Netflix stuff, because I love it. It comes from me, if that makes sense.
No, it does. No, totally. So in that respect, does something like, being on the shortlist for an Oscar, does that become all the more gratifying because of the more personal nature of the project?
Yeah, it's I mean, it's so crazy. Like I had no expectation that I was going to be in this situation. And no, it's really validating. And like, I really do feel very honored, like genuinely feel honored that we're here. And I'm so proud of my team. And I'm so happy because Muhammad and me are friends. And like, we get to enjoy this process together. For years, he was like, what are you doing? Like, get the movie out. I was like, I'll get it out. I promise you I'll get it out. And so to be here is like, it's just great,
Yeah, I was going to ask. I was going to ask, how have things changed for Muhammad, through the process and now that the film is out?
I mean, look, I'll tell you something. Like, I showed this movie to a couple of distributors who were like, you need to recut it with a happier ending. Like it just needs, if you cut it with a happier ending, you'll get shortlisted for an Oscar. Okay. So like these are and the thing is like the movie ends on a pretty ambivalent, maybe even sad note. But like the benefit of that for Muhammad is that he got to sit and watch himself on screen and to like watch an encapsulation of his traumas, like rendered in a way that he was like, this is honest, this is true. And he was like, I don't want to be this person forever. So he actually quit his architecture firm and he opened a cafe in New Haven, Connecticut called Pistachio Cafe, which is basically a little Damascus in New Haven, where you can get like incredible Syrian coffee and pastries, and they have like Sufi music. And then he got married recently, like a couple months ago. He met his wife, who's an incredible Sufi musician, and they sort of eloped. So he's doing really well, and like I'll take like the tiniest credit for it, but I'm just so happy for him.
It's such a beautiful, beautiful film, and congratulations on everything. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Oscars, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders throughout Oscar season. Jimmy Goldblum, A Broken House. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Tony. It's an honor.